I'm Tataviam Alan Salazar. Today I'm going to talk about some of our native plants that were used for medicine. And the first plant I'm going to talk about is mugwort. The leaves, you can see the shape of the leaves here. On the back, it's a little more grayish. And then on the front, it's green. When they're young, they grow down by creeks lots of times. They're a straight shoot, and then eventually they grow out and get multiple branches, and will get 3 to 4 feet tall and 4 to 5 feet in diameter. But mugwort was used for many things. They would take the leaves, rub them between their hands to get, there's a kind of a woolly-like substance to it. And then sometimes they would take the leaves and pound them and make a paste or plaster for them. So mugwort was used a lot for wounds, to put a salve over the wound to help it heal. It also helps with the rash from poison oak. And some people believe it just helps with general pain, like arthritic, rheumatoid, joint pain and things like that, muscle pain, so aches. So for the most part, it was used, the leaves were used and made a plaster or a slab ointment from it. And it would take several leaves. Sometimes they would also mix tobacco, and I'll show you a tobacco plant in a little bit. But sometimes they would mix tobacco with it, a leaf or two of tobacco and a leaf or two of the mugwort, and mix them together to make a slab and plaster. So mugwort is a very important medicine plant that we have. It grows mostly along rivers and streams. I find it interesting that lots of times you'll see poison oak, and somewhere close to the poison oak is mugwort growing. So that's the first plant I want to talk about today. And I should have started, and let me talk a little bit about if you go out to collect mugwort, if you go out to collect any native plant, white sage, coastal sagebrush, you always leave an offering of tobacco, and you thank Mother Earth for giving us this plant before you take any leaves, before you take any branches of coastal sagebrush or white sage, before you collect elderberry to make your clapper sticks. Always leave an offering. So that's the first plant that I want to talk about today. And since I mentioned tobacco, I'm going to talk about it next. California tobacco. The native tobacco to California is this plant right here. Some call it coyote tobacco, but if you look up coyote tobacco or native California tobacco, it should come up with the scientific name. A couple interesting things about our tobacco. As far as we know, it was the only plant, definitely one of the few, that was used recreationally. So men, sometimes women, would take the leaves and either dry them and put them in their pipes and smoke the tobacco recreationally at the end of the day. They also sometimes would make a concoction, a drink with it. They would take the leaves, pound them up. They would take shells, lots of times mussel shells. So they would go to the beach and get some mussel shells. They would put those mussel shells in the fire. First they would turn red, and then they would turn white. So when they were very hot, the shell would turn white. Then they would get a couple sticks, take those shells out of the fire and pound them up. And that white powder they would mix with the tobacco. One, because it's very strong, so they'd make it like half tobacco and half of that white shell powder. And then that was mixed into cold water and sometimes drank recreationally, and it was something that kind of was kind of calming and things like that. But if you drank too much of it, it could upset your stomach. So it's also used medicinally. So one method, it was common method back in 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, is the various plants that are very strong. If you drink them or chew them, make a tea from them, and you drink enough of it, it will cause you to vomit and throw up. But then lots of times that was what they were wanting to do, to get you to get rid of whatever poison. If you had a stomach ache, once you threw up, then you would feel better. So tobacco was one of those plants that is very strong, and if you make a drink from it, if you drink too much of it, it will cause you to vomit, which sometimes that was what was wanted to do. So tobacco is a seasonal plant. It lives about 3 or 4 months. This is a younger one, so it'll get a little bit taller. You can see the leaves don't get very big. Sometimes when it's a small plant, the leaves are a little bit bigger. As you can see, it has these beautiful white flowers. As the pod below the flower blooms and dries, the little pods turn tannish, and in these little pods are the seeds. So if you take a pod, there will be hundreds and dozens of seeds. I don't know if you can see them, but they're very, very small. They're just little, very tiny little specks. When you plant tobacco seeds, if you want to grow a tobacco plant, you get these small seeds and you sprinkle them on top of the earth. You don't press them down into the ground. You just sprinkle them in your pot on the earth, and then you water them gently. I like getting the little water buckets that have the little holes, and when you pour, it's like raining. And then you water it, and the tobacco plant will sprout and grow and germinate from there. If you press it down on the ground, they won't grow. So you just take these little seed pods right here, and when they dry, in them are a lot of seeds, and then you just take those seeds and you sprinkle them on the ground or in your pot, and more tobacco will grow. So that's tobacco. It's a very sacred plant. Like I said, one of the few that we use recreationally. But as I hope many of you know, those of you who don't, it's used in a lot of ceremony. So when they would smoke it in their pipe, lots of times it was used for ceremony, to use the smoke the way we use the white sage smoke, to cleanse us spiritually. Someone's sick, there were pipe doctors, and they would blow that tobacco smoke over the sick person to help cleanse them and heal them. I use it in my pipe when I'm doing a blessing and a prayer to acknowledge the 4 directions, and to acknowledge the sky people and the people in the underworld. So I blow the smoke from my tobacco in my pipe to the 4 directions, and it carries our dreams. So tobacco is a very sacred plant. It's hard to find out in the wild, so if you need some seeds, contact me, contact the tribal office, and I'll gladly send you an envelope with 30 or 40 little seeds, and you spread them and water them, and hopefully they grow. Depending on what your weather is like where you live, they're usually a spring plant, so they start to grow in the early spring, grow through the summer, and then by the fall they die. So that's why it's important, if you want to continue to grow tobacco, to collect these seed pods and always have some seeds, so that when they die in the winter, when it starts warming up again in the spring, you have a bunch of seeds to start your next season of tobacco. So that's tobacco. Next, I'm going to talk about coastal sagebrush, and then arroyo willow. One final thing before I talk about willow. Tobacco was also believed to help you be brave. So that paste I said that they would make from the leaves and the seashells, they would take that mixture and sometimes chew it, and it would make you brave. It was also believed that if you wanted a good dog, and you wanted that dog to be a good dog and to be a brave dog, you would give him some of that paste and let him chew it. There's a story how Coyote saved Halek, Hawk. And Hawk was captured by the swordfish, and it was that same paste that Coyote took with him. And when he gave that paste to the swordfish, it caused an allergic reaction, and they started sneezing uncontrollably. And then he was able to ask them questions of where Hawk was and when the other swordfish would come. So it's used in our stories, and it's what was believed to make you brave. Now, arroyo willow. There are several types of willow. Most of them have long, slender leaves, and much like the mugwort leaves, they're green on one side and then a grayish green on the back. So if you see that grayish green leaf on the back on a tree, that's willow. Arroyo willow was the one used more for medicine. There was another willow that was used more for weaving because it's very flexible, sandbar, and then red willow that was used more for tools, even canoes. So it's believed that possibly there's not a lot known about it, but many of the tribes would make small dugout canoes from the trunks of willow trees, sometimes cottonwood, but lots of times willow. So the willow trees that had a trunk that grew nice and straight for 10, 12 feet, when they would die and fall over, they would take those trunks and make dugout canoes, smaller ones to be used in rivers and streams and lakes and ponds. So the various types of willow. Arroyo willow was the one I believe that was used mostly for medicine. So the bark was chewed lots of times. It helps with pain and headaches and things like that. So willow was an important plant to use for medicine. Mostly the bark, sometimes the leaves, but mostly the bark, and usually it was chewed. So you can take that willow bark and peel it off and take a couple pieces and just chew it. If you have any pain, a headache, it will help with that. But like I said, willow also, like many of our plants, has many uses. As you can see, the willow branches grow nice and straight, and when they're green, they're very flexible. So we would use those for frames of our houses. The bigger, straighter ones would be the base, the poles. The thinner ones like these were used for the rings that could bend. You can also take that bark in the springtime when it's nice and fresh and green and pliable, and you can pull off long strips of it, and you can weave that together and make a twine. So lots of times the willow, when we were building our sweat lodges, our homes, our shade structures, the whole willow was used. So the bigger poles were used for around the frame, the smaller ones for rings, and then strip that bark off and take a couple pieces of the long bark, 2 pieces, and weave them together, and that would be used to tie the rings and the poles together. So you can pretty much build the frame of your house with willow, and if you get a headache while you're building it, you just chew on some of that bark. So willow was an extremely important plant. One of the qualities about the willow leaves, it's a natural insect repellent. So we would weave storage baskets from the willow, the small thin branches like this that are very flexible, and we would leave the leaves on them. So if you're going to store acorn meal, chia seeds, pine nuts, you would weave your basket with willow. Like I said, sandbar willow was the most flexible, and you can weave with it, make nice big 3 foot in diameter storage baskets, make a lid to go over the top of it and leave those leaves on, and it would keep the insects out of it. So your acorn meal would be protected through the whole winter. So you would have that to make acorn mush, acorn soup, and things like that. So willow, once again, is an extremely important plant for most California natives throughout California. Coastal sagebrush. Coastal sagebrush is a plant that I use quite often. It does have some medicinal uses, headaches. Lots of times it was believed just to keep you cool. So men and women would take a sprig of this and put it underneath their hat or put it in their bandana, and it would help keep them cool. As medicine, they would make a tea that kind of helps with headaches and things like that. But for me, more importantly, it was used in ceremony, and it was used in a healing way. Spiritual people will get water. I like going to the ocean and getting a little bucket and getting some ocean water. And when I do a blessing, I take my coastal sagebrush, dip it in the water, and I sprinkle it on the people, sprinkle it on the ground, on the circle, and use it similar to the way that white sage is used in ceremony. Coastal sagebrush was also used when people died. So it has a very unique, strong odor, and it would be used to purify and cleanse the house after someone had passed. It would also be used to start fires. So when it dries, it's a great fire starter. So many times when someone would die and they were going to burn their possessions, they would use coastal sagebrush. So the smell cleanses and everything. And then some spiritual people, and I do this, when I feel I need to be cleansed spiritually, I take coastal sagebrush, mugwort. So I'll take a leaf or two of mugwort, a twig like this, and I'll put it in my bathtub. And the coastal sagebrush and the mugwort will cleanse you spiritually. So I put it in my bath water, and then I soak in it, go underwater, so my hair and head gets cleansed with this. But making a tea was a common thing with the coastal sagebrush also. But I use it more for ceremonial. As some of you may know, in modern times it was called cowboy cologne because of its strong, distinct smell. So the cowboys, after being out herding cattle for a couple of weeks, would rub this all over them so they wouldn't be too smelly when they came into town. Our hunters, especially when they were going deer hunting, would take it and do the same thing to mask their human smell. Deer have a strong sense of smell. So in order to mask that human smell, our hunters would take a couple twigs of this and rub it all over their body so they smell like coastal sagebrush. The best way to use it is after you're in the sweat. So you go in the sweat lodge and you're sweating, that opens up your pores, and then you rub this on, you're going to smell like coastal sagebrush. You'll be able to sneak up on whatever it is you're hunting and get closer. So it had many practical uses, medicine, for ceremonial, for hunting. Coastal sagebrush is a very important plant. Some people believe that our use of white sage, where we take white sage like this and make bundles and wrap it and dry it and then burn the sage, and the smoke cleanses it spiritually, that actually was coastal sagebrush that in the old days we used it. We would do the same thing, take a couple twigs, wrap it with some string, some twine, and let it dry, and then burn it and use it the way we use white sage today. So coastal sagebrush has been a plant that has been used by tribal people throughout California and Southern California. The Tataviam, the Chumash, the Gabrielinos, Serrano, almost all the coastal tribes, wherever there was coastal sagebrush, used it for medicine, for ceremony, to mask their smell. So coastal sagebrush, this is a nice healthy plant Um, the final plant I'm going to talk about today is elderberry. Now, people think of elderberry as used for clapper sticks. So it's a very soft wood, grows nice and straight. When it gets to be about that round, about that big around, we would cut the branches and make our simple rhythm musical instruments. But like many of our native plants, elderberry also has some medicinal uses. They would take, and these flowers are gone and dried, but in the spring it has beautiful white, light yellowish flowers that turn into the berries. And they would take those flowers and make a tea from them. Sometimes they would dry the flowers and pound them up and make a tea from that. And the tea would help with colds and fever and things like that. So it does have some medicinal uses. Also, like I said, the elderberry branches about that big around were used for our clapper sticks, and also our whistles and flutes and tubes to carry medicine in. So the center of elderberry is a very soft pith and is easily hollowed out. So many times the tribal people, both men and women, would get a piece of elderberry that long, hollow it out, maybe leave the very end, the last quarter inch, half inch, and just hollow at the one end, and then they could put their medicine, maybe their dried flower leaves from elderberry, the other plants, the mugwort and things like that, and then they would have that in their pouch, and if they needed some medicine, they had it in their elderberry tube. So elderberry also was used for medicine and musical instruments, because the shoots grow nice and straight if it's thinned out. So one thing that we've gotten away from is going out and collecting these native plants. So many elderberry trees are overgrown and the branches have interweaved, but if they're thinned out and used on a regular basis, the new branches have room to grow nice and straight. And one thing that we would make for hunting small game is we would make our bows from elderberry. It grows nice and straight. It's easy to split because it's a soft wood. It has that soft core center, so you can take a scraper blade, a knife blade, and put it right in the center of your elderberry stick and split that, so you can make a nice bow from it. We would also use elderberry in that same way along with willow. So willow wood and elderberry, we would take a 2-foot long piece, a nice big round branch, a good 2 inches in diameter, and split that and then sand it and make a nice flat piece of wood that wide, that thick, 2 feet long. We would drill a hole in the end, attach a 1.5, 2 foot long piece of dogbane twine, and that would be our bull roarer to call in people to make our announcements that we're starting ceremony. I use the bull roarer lots of times the way I use the pipe and the tobacco. So if I'm in a situation where I don't want to use the tobacco smoke, I would use a bull roarer and acknowledge the 4 directions. That makes a whirling noise. And elderberry wood and willow were 2 of the woods that were used. One, because they're soft and they're easy to work with. So you can't make a big bow to hunt big game like elk and deer, but if you're just hunting small game, elderberry bows, willow bows are excellent. Willow's a little bit harder, so those were used for the bigger bows when we did hunt elk and deer. So that's elderberry. Like many of our plants, has many uses. Some people believe that when we make our flutes, the men made the flutes when they were wooing the women. So if you were courting a beautiful woman, you might make a flute and play beautiful flute music with your elderberry flute. If you were lucky, you'd get that first date. So those are the plants that I wanted to share with you today. There are literally dozens and dozens of native plants that were used for medicine, plants that are poison to us today that were used for medicine. Poison oak. I avoid poison oak, but my ancestors used poison oak and made a drink, made a salve from it. And some people believe that native peoples have a tolerance to poison oak because we would drink a tea made from the poison oak leaves or the poison oak roots. So there are many ways to make the medicines from the native plants. Taking the leaves, pounding them, putting the leaves in water and making a tea. The roots of many of the plants are used in that same way. Many teas are made from the roots of many of our native plants. So I encourage all of you. There are many really good books out there. If you know any people that are knowledgeable about native plants, my cousin Caroline Ward knows a lot about the native plants. Sit down and talk with them. Get a book and read about the native plants, and then pass that wisdom, that knowledge. That's our knowledge. You may have to go to a book and read about native plants, but then it becomes your knowledge, and it's tribal knowledge once again. And you can do like what I'm doing today, just sharing that knowledge. It's so important that we share our wisdom and knowledge. I only know a little bit, but I want to pass on as much as I can to as many people as I can. So have a blessed day. Thank you very much.